Here we are in London in the UK. I'm Jeff Tsai. This is a video for my Forte Swordplay channel. So thanks everybody for joining us. I have a rare privilege to be here in London. This is probably like halfway through my tour, teaching at various locations. Glasgow, the Vanguard HEMA Club was fantastic as a host. I got a chance to teach one evening at the University of York White Rose group, and that was fantastic as well. And we're taking a little break, and I've gotten a chance to actually catch up with a colleague I met last year, also in the UK at Fight Camp. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Asante. I'm into weapons martial arts. I started in boxing, Thai boxing as a kid, and sort of transitioned to Wing Chun, and now I do Shastar Vidya, which is an Indian traditional battlefield sort of style, which has a lot of quirks, a lot of things that are similar to HEMA, but also quite different in a lot of ways. And yeah,
and
I'm
so
looking forward to this.
How many years have you been practicing various things?
So I've been practicing Shastar Vidya, I think 15 years now, roughly. I've done Wing Chun for about 4, and then from about 10 to, college years, I went from boxing to Muay Thai and kind of just done a bit of like tournament fighting kind of stuff.
Okay, very cool. And you and I met last year at Fight Camp. Unfortunately, I was kind of like multitasking at the time, and I only got to sort of see some of your content. So can you maybe remind me and the audience of, like, what did you teach last year, and sort of where's the connection between the system that you currently study and sort of HEMA proper? Okay,
so I think the biggest difference, I guess, between the stuff I'd done when I was younger, the boxing and whatnot, and where Shastar Vidya and HEMA cross over, is just the historical strategic element more than anything, in that combat is essentially the same to a certain degree when you're talking about just trying to win a fight. Dueling looks like dueling in various styles to a certain degree, but when it comes to strategic battlefield kind of decision making, where armor is involved, where there's multiple people, where there might be people behind you, that's really where there's a lot of crossover, and there's a lot of interpretation differences, in that sometimes we look at some of the stuff you're doing and in the pictures it looks the same as how we do it, but then the way you guys interpret it is totally different, and it's a very interesting sort of place just to explore, kind of thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned the interpretation stuff, which is kind of my bread and butter. I enjoy the combative side, but I also really enjoy the, are we doing the right thing? Are we understanding what they documented and really doing what they were actually doing to the best of our ability? And one of the things that is super valuable as an interpreter is making sure that there isn't something I don't know, right? So one of the things that was really interesting talking with you last year was, I think we have a lot of takes on things that align pretty well, but you come at it from, this sort of different angle, and yet arrive at very sort of similar things. And yet even though it's sort of similarly aligned, the data and the perspective that you come at is something that is new to me. And so that's exciting to me as, there are other dimensions, thinking about like multiple opponents, thinking about fighting from an armored perspective, thinking about battlefield tactics that I don't think about necessarily as much. And yet if they kind of lead to similar conclusions about, hey, here's a good way to move, here's a good way to actually, take on an opponent in a tactical way. It's really great to find other things that help corroborate the kind of conclusions.
And also just contextualize stuff. It's like a lot of movements. So for example, in Shastar Vidya, they often talk about light strikes not really being worth it on the battlefield. They really just want to break the line, push people back, work as a team, this kind of stuff. And some of the movements look totally identical. But the way you employ them is polar opposite.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily good or bad. And they do meet in the middle, but where they meet in the middle can be difficult to discern if you don't know what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing. And when you see them meet in the middle, when you see, look at just a really high level fighter in any art really, you see this really nice blend of historic kind of movement, but well contextualized and, really effective in just getting past this guy. Not who's going to score more points, who's going to do whatever, who is moving in a way to control the situation, kind of thing.
So you and I met last year. And based on, a lot of the stuff that we seemed pretty aligned on at the Fight Camp event, one of the things that I was definitely interested in having you do, and we'll see how things work out in terms of supporting travel into the US in the coming months. But, IGX in the fall, end of September, a lot of this material, I think, has a lot of stuff that's in alignment with what we want to explore as far as small unit tactics. We have a mass melee event that we have been starting to run and grow in the past 2 to 3 years. To me, like, part of the issue is that I would say the majority of people who are, I think, like, there are a lot of people interested in it. I think there's a lot of sort of like team-based activities in HEMA that there's a lot of interest in it. People are starting to do this at events. And yet, one of the big things about HEMA is, like, it's supposed to be historical European martial arts, meaning documentation. And when it comes to, like, these sort of like small unit encounters, there's not a whole lot that's actually documented that we can actually go off of. So a lot of it has to be sort of a lot more exploratory, a lot more experimental, which personally, I know that there can be some purists who are like, there's no documentation, you shouldn't be doing it. I don't take that tack at all. I think that there's, even with documentation, there's going to be things that are not fully described. And so we're always going to have to deal with a bit of a frog DNA kind of situation, right?
No one can interpret anything perfectly.
Right.
Even if you believe you can, there's always going to be a layer of translation through whatever lens you see combat through.
So because we're dealing with situations where we don't always have documentation, we don't always have, or even if we have documentation, it's not fully documented. We have to deal with gaps. We have to deal with data that has gaps. And the thing that I've found that is really powerful, this is not, in my experience, a problem that can't be overcome. But we have to have tools and methods for dealing with it. And so part of that is to simply take a comprehensive, holistic approach of saying, okay, what are all the possibilities? Right? Can we figure out some way to look at all of the different possibilities and then step through all of those possibilities in a kind of rigorous way? Right. And so we're kind of, that's a lot of fire trucks.
There must be a big fire somewhere.
Yeah. So in terms of stepping through all of those different possibilities, we need to have how do we figure out what those possibilities are, and then how do we have a methodology to actually step through them in a specific way. So I think we're at the very early stages of doing that for multiple person kind of combat, and yet we know that that scenario definitely happened back in the day. So unless we want that to be completely blocked to us until we get documentation, the next best thing is to start coming up with, like, what are some possibilities for, like, the different things that could be done, and let's look at some other systems that already have some insight into that sort of thing.
So that was one of the things that actually attracted me to Shastar Vidya. I mean, I'm still just a student myself, but even after like 15 years, you still find scenarios that just aren't intuitive, but make a lot of sense. Like, you go, oh yeah, that would totally happen on the battlefield. I think one of the most impactful things for me was one of the first seminars I went to. They said, Gurudev Nidar Singh said, who here has experience? And he asked, for anyone over 10 years experience, anyone's boxed or whatever, and he ended up calling me out. And he said, how many people do you think it would take to take this guy out? I mean, beginners. And I think he brought out 2, 3, 4, and they're ultra timid, like super, like, fresh fighters.
Yeah.
And they couldn't really do anything to me.
Right.
Then he took 2 to the side, and he had a little conversation with them, and they came back, and all they done was kind of walk at me, and then cover their heads and charge me, and both of them grabbed onto an arm and grabbed onto a foot and dropped me to the ground. And he said, now imagine those guys have knives. And he's like, that's 10 years of experience down the drain, worth two sort of seconds worth of strategy. What happens when you take that paradigm
and scale it
and go, like, we're not just talking about beginners now, we're talking about people that train just this, so they're like rugby players, superstars of this kind of stuff, and even then that's still just the village level. Then there's like the proper, if you like, warrior level, where there's warrior games, and then there's intricacy and stuff. But it's the same paradigm.
Absolutely.
And this is where I say these things cross over into HEMA
Right, absolutely.
quite heavily, and I
Absolutely.
see stuff that's very, very similar. It's
Yeah,
just
which is
applied
awesome.
very different, just slightly differently or very different.
Right. So this is one of the things that I really wanted to try to explore at an IGX, or just a workshop or set of lectures. What happens when you take, that kind of experience from an art that already exists, and then say, okay, we want to sort of like take that knowledge transfer of those kind of scenarios, but then what happens if we use slightly different mechanics, which are kind of specific to, say, the German longsword tradition, or like how do we still try to achieve the same sort of goals using slightly different mechanics, and see how those things all kind of mix together. And again, it's very encouraging to hear that, hey, you're already seeing certain commonalities in terms of the dynamics and certain movements and things
totally.
like that. So that gives me a lot of encouragement that like this kind of like exploration might lead to something pretty exciting, which again still will be circumstantial without more historical documentation, but again, it keeps us able to explore things and at least get a sense of how do things work, right? Like how what are the possibilities of what feels realistic, what feels not realistic.
One of the ways Shastar Vidya tackles this is you start from very basic. So what I noticed in some of the HEMA classes, it's like you get a weapon straight away, you get like padded up straight away, and you start fighting. Where Shastar Vidya almost strips away all the variables and says, okay, you're just gonna have like a little shield, and you're just gonna first learn how to run in and kind of cover yourself and see if you can run in without getting totally clocked. And if you've ever watched basketball, rugby, MMA, it's not impossible to like slip past someone's punch and just go straight through them. Then they say, okay, now you have a club and you can do maybe one parry. How much does that kind of improve your ability, not to fight, but to get past the guy or knock him off balance or make him vulnerable to one of your friends? And this is one of like the massive things where there's a lot of things where it's like, even if you take all the skill out and everything goes to hell, if you guys have drilled a protocol together, the idea is that it should still work, because it's not relying so heavily on the ability for you to pull off
there's some robustness.
There's
to
robustness.
That.
There's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of redundancy, and it really changed my understanding of combat, because everything prior to that was it's skill, it's technique, it's practice, it's like get good at what you're doing. Where this was like really you don't want to rely too much on that kind of stuff until you are mature, until you're like you've been doing this for a while, you're kind of blooded, and then it gets into higher level sort of combat. But first off, strategy.
So again, like this is the kind of stuff that I'm hoping that we can, if you can make it to IGX Fall, that we can really dig into, both in terms of like lectures and workshops, and similarly we'll dig into it with what bandwidth we have today. But I think that would be a great next thing to kind of pivot over to. So I think we'll talk more about those sort of nuances next.
Yeah, sure.